In this week's episode of ND Vision.
And when I screened that, I ran for like a month worth of weekends at Boomers, which is a club in Scioto.
I'm sorry, I'm from Scioto, so
Okay.
I remember Boomers
Oh, yeah.
quite well.
No, the guy who built the house, at one point, we found one of his notebooks, and in that he had the formula for making the paint,
Oh, really?
which he did probably formulate his own paint, the Hall's Drugstores and paints.
Hello, and welcome to this episode of ND Vision. First off, this episode is being sponsored by the Wellsville Sun, and let's do a cutaway. The Wellsville Sun is this area's premier news source. From the nitty-gritty breaking news stories, event promotions, feel-good community press releases, and so much more. Keep up with what's happening in your area with the Wellsville Sun online at wellsvillesun.com and on social media. And we're back. So my guest today is Jay Wolfel, right?
Yes.
Who is one of the owners of the Pink House with his lovely wife. And he's also a film director, producer, you name it, he's done it, I feel like, in the film industry. So first off, Jay, why don't you just give me kind of a brief history about yourself?
I'm from Columbus, Ohio.
Okay.
My father and his father were both teachers at Ohio State University, which is what brought them from the New York area.
Okay.
It was three brothers. I'm the only one who actually graduated from Ohio State. So I got all those faculty build-up, reduction in tuitions that hadn't been used up.
Oh, yeah.
My grandfather was brought from New York City to Ohio State to form what we'd call the AV department, or now it's like there's other teaching. It was teaching aides originally.
Yep.
And he was big into teaching as not just people on a blackboard. You know, you use audiovisual material and all this stuff. So he was brought in to sort of start doing that. So they used to have these film strips you'd see in school where they go, each slide would have a little bing. He had a record. You go bing and you change the slide. And he did a lot of those. So one of his TAs, two people who worked with my grandfather actually were professors of mine when I went to film school.
Okay.
So I'd done one winter when it was 18 degrees below zero for a long period of time. A friend of mine who has become a lifetime news cameraman, works for the NBC station in Columbus, and myself ran out of sledding to do. So we decided to get the old 8mm camera, not Super 8, but 8mm, and shoot a movie and shoot some stuff. And shortly after that, I got a Super 8mm camera and decided to make a James Bond parody, which was a stop motion animation thing. So I built all the sets and had all these model kits of tanks and stuff, and did this James Bond, supposed to be like a parody. By the time I was done making it, I was a total Bond head, you know. So once that was done, I showed it. My parents were like, "Well, you should show it to Dr. Wagner, who was a student under my grandfather, because he's in the film department." And so I showed it to him. It ended up running 45 minutes long. So it wasn't a feature, but for Super 8, it was a feature.
Right.
So he said, "Yeah, you could have a career in doing film stuff," which had never really occurred to me.
Mm-hmm.
So he was like, "Well, you should come to Ohio State and take some classes and see." You know, this was a couple years. I was not out of school yet, but now he thought I should design sets and stuff because, you know, being a Bond spoof, it had to have all these big sets, and I'd built all that stuff, but I just did that because there was nobody else to do it. That wasn't really my prime focus.
Right.
So that's what got me started.
You didn't have any inspirations to go work for Industrial Light and Magic with your set
They,
design?
not yet. No. 'Cause
Okay.
This was really before Star Wars came out that I did that, my first thing.
Okay. What time frame was this then?
This would have been late. I mean, I graduated high school in 1980.
Okay.
This would have been in the 1970s.
Yeah.
I mean, Connery was no longer Bond. It was beyond that, but
Yeah.
it's the Roger Moore era. If we're going to time everything by James Bond movies, that's Spy Who Loved Me was the first Bond film I saw in a theater. I
Okay.
always tell people, whatever Bond movie you see first in a theater will probably be your favorite Bond movie because they are more alike than different. And, you know,
Right.
you watch them on video or whatever, but then when you really see one in the theater, you'll be like, ah. So anyway, that's no longer my favorite, but it's among my favorites. Anyway, so yeah, I started doing film school to just see what would happen. I got all straight A's except in photographic process that had a lot of chemistry involved.
Mm-hmm.
Most of that chemistry is no longer involved in filmmaking, just as film is no longer involved in filmmaking by and large.
Very true. This is all digital today.
It's all digital. Yeah. In film school, mostly we had to shoot on video because film was expensive, and our department had more. They had an equal amount. Ohio State, is, if anybody had ever noticed, is a big football school. Yeah. So the film department really grew out of the fact that they bought all this film equipment to shoot the football games. Mm-hmm. And then they were like, hey, why don't we like teach some stuff since we have this stuff laying around the rest of the year? So in film school, initially we were shooting a lot of video, and I learned how to do video editing and a lot of the kind of quickness and, you know, easiness to a degree of video.
Yep.
So then I moved to Los Angeles finally in around 1990. And, so I know film and video. I did a feature at Ohio State after I graduated from undergraduate school. I did the graduate project I did with this producer, Sue Rosatka, and other people. It's called The Birthmark, which we actually shot at the Pink House. So we can get to that later. But after that, I did a feature in Ohio as a graduate project, just because we'd done all these shorts. I made a lot of good friends in film school. And the key thing I discovered later was that at Ohio State, with the friends I got to know, we all helped each other make movies. So we all made a lot more movies because it wasn't just it was your turn or somebody else's turn, but we all helped each other. So we all made a lot more stuff.
Right.
Because when I started to meet filmmakers from other big film schools, if they were lucky and they got to direct like one, what you might call a real movie, a sync sound, where I'd worked on dozens of films and done over a dozen myself by that point. So I did a feature. I moved to Los Angeles. People there didn't really know or like videotape much, but it was the era of where that was transitioning. So I kind of learned both at a time when that was important because people in Los Angeles didn't understand video. And
now, are you talking beta or VHS?
This was, I think VHS-C was like coming along.
A little smaller, smaller ones.
And of course, beta. We didn't have beta. It was 3/4 in film school. And then 8mm came out right around the time we were done. 8mm video, not Super 8 and all that stuff.
Right.
So there were all these new formats all the time. And then eventually there was digital video, and everybody was always talking about, this new video format. It's just as good as film. It looks just like film. And as Dean Cundy, the guy who shot Halloween and Jurassic Park, who I actually got to know and work with briefly, but he didn't say this to me, but his one phrase was like, well, if you want something to look like film, we have that. It's called film. So why are we all excited about all these new digital formats to look like?
Yeah.
Now, eventually they got a resolution where now it's, it's mostly digital. But anyway, so I moved to LA. I started working at the American Film Institute as an editor because I'd learned in Ohio, there was no film industry. If you wanted to make a movie, you had to do everything yourself.
Right.
Now you can much more easily because everybody has a workstation. I tell people from 20 feet away, virtually every job looks the same. It's, So, yeah. So I went there as an editor, and then while I was editing, actually that feature I'd done in Ohio, got released. And so then I started showing that to people, and people were like, "Oh, you're not really an editor, you're really a director." And, but yeah, I got to know everything. I got to work in music I'd done before film, but I knew music, and then editing and shooting to a degree. I did shoot a feature before I directed one. I didn't end up, a friend of mine, Scott Spears, and another guy, Jose Cardenas, ended up being my DPs and still are to this day, mostly, although I've worked with other people, including Dean Cundy, who's no slouch. But
DP is director of photography.
For
those who don't know.
Yes. So when my feature came out, then people were, you made a movie in Ohio, and it actually got released in the United States because that was, everybody makes a movie, but usually they sit in their closet, Right. So, so I've been there ever since in Los Angeles. working on one thing or another. Although I've contributed bits of dialogue and things like that to theatrical features, I've never directed a theatrical feature myself.
Okay.
But if I'm not doing music for somebody, I'm editing for somebody, or I'm directing and making a film for myself. My most recent film was released in about 2018. It all depends on, once a movie comes out, then it, comes out a year later here and there, and called Asylum of Darkness. So that's my most recent feature, which turned out to be Richard Battlestar Galactica Hatch rather than Richard Survivor Hatch, which drove Richard Battlestar Galactica Hatch crazy because people were calling him up going like, oh yeah, I hear you're naked on Survivor.
Yeah.
It's like, no, I'm not the gay, overweight, naked man on Survivor. He called up SAG. It's like, he's not in SAG. He's just a guy named Richard Hatch. So we can't. In SAG, the Screen Actors Guild, if you become an actor and your name is Richard Hatch and there's 3 other Richard Hatches, you got to change. You got to pick some different name.
Right.
That's why Martin Sheen and Joe Estevez and Emilio Estevez. And this is why you end up with, a family might not seem like a family because their names were changed thanks to the Screen Actors Guild.
Yeah, I think a lot of people don't realize that Charlie and Emilio are brothers. So.
Yeah. And it's the same mother. That's not the.
Yeah. So you've graduated, you're working for the Film Institute of America. What, and this was in the early 90s.
Yeah.
And, didn't you direct make a film at the Pink House in like 92 or?
The Birthmark, which was done as a postgraduate short film, really for the producer, Sue Zatka, we all got credit, but it was her graduate thesis project.
Okay.
Like I said, we all worked on different, so that happened to be hers. We wanted to make a feature and then the money just wasn't there. So we did that. That film's actually finally coming back out, but so that we came to the Pink House to shoot. So we wanted to do the feature. All the money fell through. It's like,
right.
I've got to make another student film. And, I had read The Birthmark, which is a Nathaniel Hawthorne short story.
Okay.
I don't think I was really looking for, in school, you're forced to read all these things, Faulkner, William Faulkner, Ernest Hemingway, and you read them, and John Steinbeck. I never really took to any of those guys. But Hawthorne was somebody who I did like. And so when I didn't have to read,
yeah,
you know what I mean? When you're not reading, the latest comic book or whatever,
right,
paperback of no worth, according to your parents. That was so, anyway, I read that story. It was probably one of the first ones I picked up and read just on my own outside of school. Okay. I read a lot of other ones. So we were looking for something to do. And I thought, well, the Pink House could be, that story could be set at the Pink House. So let's, Columbus, Ohio back then was more like an 8-hour drive or more even.
Right.
Let's all pack up our stuff and come to the Pink House and shoot a movie on film too. And give it a go. But, it's a big ordeal to, there's no support system.
Right. The
camera breaks. You can't just drive down the road and get another camera kind of thing. And we did have technical issues, none of them crippling.
Okay.
But it was really like, well, the Pink House will be worth it, which largely it was. And to date, that's the only film I've shot entirely at the Pink House. I was back here and did a movie in 2000 and whenever Katrina was, Hurricane Katrina 5. Yep. That's what I thought. Because it rained. We were shooting a movie at Rushford Lake, and it just rained and rained. And when it would stop raining, we'd run back out and try to finish up some scene we'd shot before it rained. And so a little of that film was shot at the Pink House, but most of it was shot at Rushford Lake. And when I screened that, I ran for like a month worth of weekends at Boomers, which was a club in Scioto.
I'm sorry, I'm from Scioto, so okay. I remember Boomers.
Oh yeah,
quite well.
So anyway, that film was called Ghost Lake. So we ran that there.
I remember that, quite honestly.
You could have. It was a free screening.
Probably went to it,
but people called and like booked it. Just we were going to just do it one weekend, and it ran for a whole month.
Yeah.
At Boomers. And Boomers was fairly new at the time, and that guy lived at Rushford Lake, and so we were kind of helping promote him, and he got a really nice video projector system. His old one was kind of trash, and he knew it, so he was like, ah. So anyway, at those screenings, people were, well, you're made a ghost movie. Why didn't you make it at the Pink House? I was like, well, because there are no ghosts at the Pink House. They're all at Rushford Lake. So that's why we went there.
Speaking of the pink house, in case you didn't notice, this is a different backdrop than what my normal podcasts are. That's because we are in fact inside the pink house right now. And what room is this that we're in?
This is the it's one of the master bedrooms. It is really kind of the newest sort of master bedroom.
Okay.
My grandparents, the history of the house is kind of simple. The original guy who built it was named Edwin Bradford Hall, or E.B. Hall. He ran Hall's Drugstore, which is now the same building and some of the same interior as the Beef House.
Okay.
He married into this Farnham family, which there's still things in town called Farnham Island Park was originally, I think they said they called it Farnham Island, and the cemetery was originally, he was a big lumber guy and stuff.
Mm-hmm. And that's on South Main, the cemetery on South Main?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, E.B. Hall, after he married, like built the pink house as his house to move into. He had one daughter, named Fanny. So he was the Hall. That's the Halls. He's descended from William Bradford Hall.
Okay.
I mean, William Bradford, the Pilgrim, Governor William Bradford, that's his direct descendant. So after the Halls, his one daughter, Fanny, married a carpenter. And after that, their daughter, who is my grandmother, married a guy named Woofle who lived in Buffalo.
Okay.
They shared almost like sort of childhood best friends. And the couple knew each other their whole lives and stuff. So, when they became the Woofles, my grandfather, as I mentioned earlier, was teaching at Ohio State. So this was grandma's house. He would come to grandma's house.
Yep.
So the owner, the original builder, his daughter lived in the house. She lived to be 92. She lived here her whole life and died in about 1958.
Okay.
So after they got married, this room was expanded and built out, for them.
Mm-hmm.
So this was sort of the master bedroom for the kids' new husbands and wives. And stuff. So when Fanny got married, this became her bedroom, and then when her daughter, my grandmother, got married, then this was sort of remodeled again to be my grandparents' bedroom. The back, this is sort of the back of the house. I think this part of the house is warmer because it seemed like people tended to live back here more.
Really?
Yeah. So it's got these cool bay windows, which were built out at one point. One of these used to have a special UV glass, not to keep it out, but to bring it in.
Yeah.
Because at the time, vitamin D and UV was considered. So this is usually the room that whoever the best guest gets to stay in when they come. It also is right next to the bathroom.
Right. Yeah. The door leads in. I saw that over there. So growing up, I got to be completely honest with you. I was incredibly excited when your wife reached out, and we came up with the idea to actually film it and record it in here because I've been, growing up, there's so much lore behind the pink house, like the girl in the well, a bunch of other mysteries that rumors that have come up. And
I always love to hear all those stories.
Yeah.
So you can tell me your version of the ghost story because
there's just the little girl in the well. She was in a wheelchair and she fell into this well and passed away. And now she's a ghost that roams around the house here. Have you ever felt any presence?
I have not. That's a good high. Like I've not heard quite that version of the story actually. So that's good. See, everyone's a little different. The girl in the wheelchair is different. Yeah.
Okay.
There is a wheelchair and a girl, but they're not actually together. So
okay.
That much is true.
So everything's kind of just getting pushed together and as time goes on and blended. And
there wasn't a well, it was a fountain. But anyway, I don't even know if I want to try to untangle all the ghost stories.
No.
There's no, I mean, I've never, in horror movies and stuff like Haunting a Hill House, I don't know whichever movie or book did this originally. There was this idea that this is a house that, hates people kind of thing. And that's always kind of the thing. So my only I think this house really likes people.
Yeah.
But there's not like I see Casper the Friendly Ghost or, if you drop $1, you pick up a 5. There's none of those kind of things, I
kind of wish that if I dropped $1
that would be good. So that's there's a feeling of somebody else was talking about it. There's a certain feel to the house if you're sitting in it and doing stuff here. I mean, for one thing, somebody recently online or someplace said, oh yeah, Pink House. Yeah, that's considered a landmark and a place you should go see if you're in Wellsville. And that's really weird because it's a private residence. It's like, well, why is that weird? But in a way, I guess it is, because you go to like Mount Vernon or
Right.
someplace, this is still a living house. So we don't do tours usually, but the Monday Club sort of guilted us into doing a tour for them.
I might try to guilt you into one too. So
Okay, yeah. So we just did one the other day. And yeah, and the people, a number of the women of the house's history were in the Monday Club and helped sort of set it up and stuff. So we did a tour, and I didn't really mention this to them, but I wanted to kind of say, it's like, everything you see here works.
right.
Yeah, you can sit on that chair, you can turn on that light, you can open that desk, because we get so used to these kind of museums where,
Right. You can't touch anything.
yeah,
Or-
which is kind of understandable in a way, but yeah, it's a living, not in a ghostly way, but it's a living house. And some friend who we were talking about all this stuff, it's like, he goes, I think it's a sense of history. It's like a living history when you're in here. And that's what's different than like a kind of a museum kind of environment where it's
Right.
stuffed or a little bit of freezer burn going on there.
No, this is my first time inside the house. I was telling my wife, my wife's a professor over at Alfred State for math, but I was telling her, like, I'm gonna go in the pink house. She's like, oh, I just want to take off and just I can act as the producer. I can press record on things. But
What was interesting is, like, I became interested in, horror fiction to a degree and that sort of stuff growing up. And it wasn't because of the pink house, but then later when, there's I suppose like the first kind of codified version of the ghost story is this book, which is at the Wellsville Library still, called Things That Go Bump in the Night. So, but what I quickly found is that, well, that's like your version, like that's not really
right, it just
that the only place I've ever read or heard that whole version that way is in that book.
okay.
And that person who wrote it like came here and talked to people, and supposedly, maybe they embellished it some themselves. But since then, trying to like puzzle out, okay, well, who is the little girl, and
Right.
who is the wheelchair and all this kind of stuff. What's different about the pink house is usually you go to these houses which are famously or infamously haunted, and usually they pass through so many hands that there is no real story. It's like,
Sure.
well, did this person's by this name even live in this house? And so here we don't have all the answers to not the haunting, but we don't have all the answers to some of these connections between people, but we have a lot more than you usually do. So we actually know, like, yes, this person never lived there. That's totally wrong. And this is right. And so that's been real interesting, because I'm sure other haunted houses where nobody can actually trace the history have as many or even more bogosities of coincidence and confabulations of
Right.
4 different stories into one. And I just assume that because in my case, I actually sort of know more of the fact than the fiction.
Right.
And over the years, we've discovered things which we assumed were wrong or assumed were right. And then because of my parents, all my family, but my parents and my mother also, they like really, when they started living here, it's very cold in New York a lot of the time. So this has
Right
been,
now.
yes, like right now. This has been basically a summer house for my family. My grandmother lived here during the good months. Now, maybe sometimes it's 4 months, maybe it's 3, maybe it's 4.5. So they, over the years with my parents, when they were living here, and interacting with the community on a bigger basis, certainly than my grandmother, because they came here a little earlier
Sure.
in their own age. People at various towns would find stuff. And of course, with the internet age and all this stuff, information crops up. So I was, of my 2 brothers, I was the one who was really interested in family history and the pink house in particular. I remember coming up here the first time that I can remember. I'm sure I was here when I was even smaller, but I remember coming down State Street, because then you come in from that way.
And what year would have this been when you first remember coming here?
Yeah, probably the late 60s. I
Okay.
would guess, maybe earlier. But for me, it was my first trip. No, this would have been the mid 60s, because my grandfather was still alive. But I remember driving down, like, oh, the pink house, because and looking through
Yeah.
the trees and seeing this pink, house, and driving up, looking out of the back of the station wagon up at the tower. And all that stuff.
I'm still trying to find a station wagon with a back seat. Like that's my goal, to buy one of
Oh
those.
yeah, where they go back. Yeah,
Yep.
this one you'd sit.
You can sit backwards and look out the back.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
I want one
It
so
could be a
bad.
seat or it could be a bed, depending.
Right. And you came kind of just doing, I did Rich Shear and Rick Whitwood. It seemed like the 60s through the early 80s were kind of a cool time to be in Wellsville.
I think probably it's after the oil refinery finally
Right.
shut down.
Yeah.
So the town was probably kind of looking for what it was going to be now.
Mm-hmm.
Probably the population started to drop some too, I would imagine.
I imagine,
Yeah, naturally.
Um,
And eventually they cleaned all that up. It was like hideously polluted, as you know.
yeah.
And BP bought it. But so, and my, I inherited some Exxon stock because, oil, this was the world of oil
Yep.
in the United States.
Mhm.
The first discovery of oil is not too far from here. You can still go and see the little bubbling pool of goo with the pictures of the Native Americans and the missionary, the preacher, whoever he was, like being shown the oil. Hey, this stuff burns. Hey, look at this.
Right.
Who knew? So my relatives did benefit from that because the farms are big lumbermen. And of course, they stripped all the lumber down. It's like, hey, there's oil under here.
Right.
And of course, like humanity does, and they like suck that dry and move on from one thing to another. What's interesting to me now is you drive in and there's all these beautiful trees. Of course, when you look for old pictures, there's no trees.
Around the pink house.
Yeah, right, in general. Yeah. On all these hills were like farmed.
Mhm.
And machine farming can't handle those kind of angles. So,
Right.
it's more kind of back to probably the way it was before some of these towns were even built.
Now, when your grandparents owned it, was there staff here? Because it seems like there's be a lot of house to take care of.
There's always been, almost from the beginning, there's always been an apartment, which we're like sitting on top of right now.
Okay.
And there was always, there is a carriage house, barn. So there used to be, obviously, horses went out a while ago.
Right.
But it was built for somebody to live in the carriage house. But yeah, there's a you could call it a maid's room. It's more like a housekeeper's room upstairs here, right next to what was probably the first bathroom upstairs.
Okay.
I
didn't know if there's like a chef on hand or.
Yeah, I think the housekeepers usually cooked also.
Oh, really?
I think.
Nice.
The guy who built the house, his daughter, my great grandmother, she lived to be 93, so she sort of had a housekeeper caretaker who she remained after she died until like 1972, Bertha Atwood.
Okay.
So this side of the house, when we came to visit, it was kind of Bertha's rules because Bertha lived here, and we had to ask Bertha for the key to this or that, kind of thing. And she was a very nice person, but it was even though it was our house, it was sort of Bertha's house.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For obvious, she knew what things to touch or what, and to a certain degree, she kind of let certain things kind of go. That's like, well, just don't touch that faucet. Let's just fix it.
Right.
No, let's just not touch it. And my grandmother was still alive also, so she would come up. And then when she died, my father basically bought it from his brother.
Okay. And then.
So yeah, so there was, and before that, so there was always somebody who was a housekeeper, whether there was ever, I don't know if there was ever a live-in cook or not. There was always somebody in the apartment. What happened with the apartment was, originally it was the kitchen.
Okay.
And then as kitchens became more kind of manageable, they built that out and turned it into an apartment. The first wheelchair in the pink house's history was actually the guy who built the house married into a family, and one of their daughters had polio.
Oh, okay.
And so she had a wheelchair. And once the pink house was built, she sort of divided her time between staying here at the pink house. So they had a downstairs bedroom and a back entrance and bathroom for her, and just across the street, sort of the relatives' family. So she would sort of move. I always thought that was kind of nice or interesting. This is back before people had handicap entrances, or, people were like, some people felt that you had polio or something, it was God's curse. There's all this kind of, a lot of stigma. There's still some stigma, but, so yeah, what happened with the apartment was that, I mentioned that my grandparents met through their best friends.
Okay.
And their best friends moved down to Kentucky and had a farm that like caught on fire, and they lost everything. including their cat. Everything they had, they
man.
lost. And so my grandparents were like, come live at the Pink House and you just have the apartment, don't pay us. And so they lived there the rest of their lives.
Okay.
So after they, my grandmother died and then her friend moved out to be with some in-laws and stuff. After that point, it became like the caretaker's, apartment. So although it was a summer house for us, somebody always lives here.
Okay.
And then there was somebody who lived on this side who took care of things. It's become now more like when we're not here that Jordan, the current caretaker, is a real caretaker in terms of he does the lawn and fixes things to a certain degree. The Halloween spectacular or spooktacular, if you prefer. We supplied the props, but he like executed putting it all up. And when he was hired, quote unquote, to be the caretaker, it was like, you must do Halloween because that's become something the Pink House is really known for. Well, he's like, just like I am, but he's a huge Halloween fan.
Okay.
Halloween, the movie, but just Halloween in general too.
Yeah.
So people are always like, well, who lives there? Well, somebody has always lived here. Just a matter of, do they live in the apartment or are people in both places?
You always hear the stories of people walking by just out on a walk with their dog or whatever, and they just see people moving in the windows, the silhouettes, and it might just be him, right?
Yes. And there's automatic lights and there's cameras all over the place now. My parents came to understand when and I think this has sort of changed over time too. At one point, some of the Alfred fraternity brothers came over and stole the lions off the front steps.
Oh, really?
Which is how we learned that the lions are actually like metal, not stone.
Huh.
They're still very
That would
unwieldy.
be quite heavy.
The police pulled them over because they were, drunk as skunks, and what's in the trunk? Oh, gee, where do you think these came from?
Yeah.
And which is kind of how we found out they were gone. It's like, boom, 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 boom. Are you missing your lions? Like, what? There was one paw. There was one lonely paw that they just kind of snapped off, was still connected. And the kids used to I think the bus stop was right outside. So the kids would kick the posts and all this kind of stuff. So I think there was a little bit of a, not animosity, but almost like a rivalry, or I guess maybe when my parents lived here, they came to understand that most of the community in the town really cares for the house in a way that they'll call if something weird is going on before, with the lions almost. It's like, and I think the community over time, of course, the house becomes sort of more special by the time they put it on the sign for the town, kind of thing. So there is a sort of protective element to the community about the house, which is special and is really nice.
I think this is listed as one of the things to do if you visit Wellsville, is come by the Pink House and take a photo. So.
It is, yeah. People do come to the door. My wife and I stay in the front bedroom, not this master, but the kind of original master bedroom, which I said that part of the house seems to be more for guests, but for us, it's where we stay.
Okay.
Well, that's the windows face right into out, and so in the morning you get up and kind of look out. And you got to be careful what you do because there's almost always somebody stopping out there to take a picture, right? And then it hasn't happened this time, but we gave it to her, so maybe that stopped it. There'll be the front doorbell will ring. There's two doorbells that sound totally different. Most people who've come here come to the back door. So if the front doorbell rings, it's like somebody who's never been to the house before.
That was
That's
me.
not entirely true. Yeah, exactly. And that's fine. But it's like, is somebody scheduled? No. So you go open it. It's like, oh, when's the next tour? It's like, never.
Yeah.
We don't do that. And one woman actually said, well, I read that, when you come to Wellesley, you must see the Pink House. I said, yes, and you've seen it.
It's outside.
Yeah. And I then took them of a tour of the yard and stuff. And, I said, this is more than I usually, but it's a private residence and we don't do tours. Except there was a big hospital benefit that we did and the Monday Club thing, so, and where my mother did a sort of famous, come have tea with her and stuff like that. And we love to do that kind of stuff too, but that's just friends coming over to the house.
What do you think what do you think people's biggest misconception of the Pink House is that you'd like to kind of set?
Whatever I say certainly won't clear it up for all time,
right?
Much as I might like to.
Well,
it's
the mysterious place.
A couple things that And somebody asked me this yesterday on the tour. The one thing, aside from like the ghost stuff, one time we were here, this couple who we had seen, they were walking the block. I mean, we walked the block. And so one day when we were leaving, the couple said, "Hey, could we talk to you? Are you the owners?" Because they had talked to Jordan, and the Jordan said, "You need to ask the owners, and they're coming here soon." So they stopped us at the gate as we're leaving. They're like, "Can we talk to you?" And Jordan said, "You're the owner. Are you the owners?" Yeah. And I introduced my wife, and I were in the car. And he said, "Could I ask you 2 questions?" I was like, "Sure." I was like, "Oh, thank God, only 2. Okay, yeah." And he goes, "Is it haunted?" We're like, "No." My wife's like, "If it was haunted, I would never stay here. And
Right.
I've been here and nobody's ever seen anything. I might have told some version of my house that likes people story or whatever." And he goes, "Okay, good. We're about to get married. We wonder if we can come take some pictures in the yard." Now, if I'd have said it was haunted, I guess he wouldn't have asked the second question, or was like, "Okay, I don't want to be married here." So they weren't married, but they did come and take pictures. Again, if you ask, we won't always say yes.
Right.
But he's a neighbor, and yeah, but we'd never met him before. But yesterday I got asked one of the sort of preconceptions, which is kind of one of 2 things. Like, either why is it pink? Or yesterday, the more thing is like it was left in the will of the guy who built it or whatever that it must always be pink, which is not true. He never stipulated that it had to be pink.
Okay. Because it was just recently, 2 years ago, painted, or 1 year? Was it last year?
Yes. Just last. Yeah. Just last year.
Yeah. My friends, Casey and Rob, I went to school with them.
Yeah, yeah.
On it, so.
They're great. We watched them painting a house across the street. My grandmother was named after the people who used to live in that house. Florence Howard was her mother's best friend. And so I said, "Well, you realize that you're connected to the pink house because that was their best friend's house. And
Oh, really?
we saw you doing a great job on that house, and we knew the pink house needed to be painted." My mother had died, and then the estate, I had to buy the house from the estate. So once that was all, and that takes, it was very well organized, and it still takes way longer than you want to. It's just what
Really?
everybody's going to discover, The less organized it is, the worse it is. But it's still, you just want to grieve or remember, and instead it's like all this business nonsense. So once that all got taken care of, my one brother's health was not good, and then my father died, and my mother died. So then got up here. So the house was probably like 5 years overdue for getting painted.
Okay. When was it, since last year, when was the last time it was previously painted?
Well, for years we had this guy, Wendell Foote and Vicky Billings, and their family and other people they hired who worked here almost constantly during the summers. So there was almost always something getting painted. So really, whenever Wendell first started and whenever he finished his first pass,
Okay.
would have been, but then he kept it up. So it didn't really need to be, even though things were starting to fade. But then Wendell himself had died. And so it'd been 10 years or more.
Wow.
I can remember the house being painted really only maybe 4 or 5 times in my lifetime, which I guess would be about every 10 years or something, maybe.
Oh, I remember a rumor or mystery here that the original pink paint was like imported from France or something, or overseas somewhere.
Right. No, the guy who built the house, at one point, we found one of his notebooks, and in that he had the formula for making the paint.
Oh, really?
Which he did probably formulate his own paint. The Hall's Drugstores and paints. So they sold and made paints. And
was this back in the lead paint days?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, the lead paint. I never ate any paint off the pink house.
Please don't
While I
eat
can
paint off
form,
the pink house.
while I can form sentences. So he did probably make the paint in the drugstore, and the drugstore did have at one point, it was the first like soda fountain in town. And there was a lot of these kind of firsts, cause he's a savvy businessman or whatever, and trying to get the stuff. So he had ordered French glass windows, cause they were very big.
Yeah.
Cause these are, windows are, this was a big, so to get a huge, big plate glass thing. So I think that's where the French thing comes from.
Oh, so they just assumed that the paint came with the windows. All right.
But it didn't. The paint was but he did mix it up over there.
That's
himself,
so interesting
probably.
that I was just right down on Main Street.
And he was really into sort of unusual colors.
Mm-hmm.
This pink is more pink than what his pink was, which was more kind of mauve. But the kind of the wine color accents, that was, eventually my grandmother one time was like, you know what, just make it pink.
Yeah.
Because I remember when she said that.
So
but the pink, and then why pink? Well, for one thing, it's an Italian style. I guess it's a Queen Anne revival is technically the style of the house. The guy who built it did help design it with an actual architect whose name we know. Don't ask me right now. Searle, I think. Hank Searle. That made me wrong. So he did help design the house. And the story was it was based on a house he saw in Lake Como when he went to Italy on his honeymoon.
Okay.
And they did, this house took perhaps as long as 2 years to be built.
Mm-hmm.
They moved in either in 1868 or 69, and he bought the property in 1866.
Okay.
And his daughter was probably a year and a half old by the time they moved in. That was always the story. And a friend of my dad's who worked here when he was a little kid and mowed the lawn. He said there used to be a book here on the shelf. Last time he ever came to the house, he went over the shelf and goes, the book was right here. And he goes, you flip in and there was a picture of the pink house, except it was this Italian house.
Ah.
Now we've never been able to find that book. He couldn't find it. My parents went to Como looking for the pink house, didn't find it, although they found a lot of pink houses.
Okay.
My wife and I went to Lake Como recently. We told some version of the story, and in the local paper, they put a picture of the pink house, and the Italians were like, oh, of course, the American version is made of wood, not stone. It should be made of stone. But in Lake Como,
they're so particular.
Yeah, when we went there to Como, eventually there's this hill, and it's all chopped up because that's where they quarried a lot of the rocks to make the Como. The local rock is pink granite.
Ah.
So if you can't afford pink granite, you then paint your house pink.
Yep.
Because that's why Como has a lot of pink houses in it. So I think it's probably a composite of things he liked.
Mm-hmm.
He liked the sort of asymmetrical tower, and there are towers like that. There's a huge house with a huge tower in Como to this day. And we found a house that was mostly painted pink, that's laid out much the same, that's actually owned by the Heinz
Ketchup?
Yeah, Heinz Ketchup heiress.
Okay.
And she's married to the Vietnam presidential guy. We'll remember him later. The fast boat guy. He was a Vietnam vet. He was a POW. And anyway, so weirdly, So I think that's the Como thing. I think he saw stuff, but that's why pink initially.
Okay.
And plus, he liked unusual colors. But Victorian houses are always almost dazzle painted. Supposedly Victorians have to have, I think, 3 different colors at least.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah,
really, I never knew that.
Yeah, that's part of some painter recently was like, well, yeah, it's got to have at least 3 colors.
So this is pink, white. What's the
sort of wine color, which is the accents around all the windows.
Okay. So the original builder kind of Citizen Kaned it. He just kind of took everything that he liked and put it all in one house then.
Right. Right. Yeah. E.B. Hall. Yeah.
Now
there's also a story which is the little more spurious. He's from Bridgeport, Connecticut. And Bridgeport, Connecticut's kind of most famous citizen, certainly at the time, was P.T. Barnum.
Oh yeah.
And a friend and the guy who built the house, his parents are buried in the same cemetery as P.T. Barnum and Tiny Tim and the Giant, I think. We should know the Giant's name. But anyway, there is a house there purportedly that looks like this, but I've not really seen the original source. The person who told me this is a little dodgy.
Okay.
But it's flipped. It's flipped left to right. Like the towers, and it was all white. It was just a white house. But I don't have a photo of it. It's gone now. And I haven't had the time to go to Bridgeport, Connecticut and really go, okay, the house was here until it burned down or something, say 1970. There's a lot of photography going on. Show me a picture of the house. But that house is not pink. So whichever story you care to believe. So yeah, why is it pink? Recently I heard that actually the caretaker, Jordan, had heard that it was painted red originally, and then it faded to pink. And so then we just painted it pink afterwards.
Oh.
I'd never heard that version of the story before.
Never heard that either.
And then the other most popular thing is it haunted? And then the various derivations of that.
I want to move into your film career, but I just have one more question. on the Pink House. Thank you very much, by the way, for going into some of the history, and because I know that people are very curious about this house. But
the other thing about this house is it sounds like I'm bragging or something, and the Woofles, I think, in the halls are about to sort of die out with me. But the house has always been owned by the same family,
right?
Which is really rare. In the when America turned 200 years old, there's a whole big bicentennial deal, and people started being more interested in history. And then Roots came along, and that opened it up for Black people's history, and so there was a real kind of that's when people started being interested again in Victorian houses. And so there's been several books, and the Pink House was in the very first one, which was published.
Okay,
and it was on the cover. And that book did really well, so they did another book several years later. And I was actually living in California and up in San Francisco at the Palm Court of one of the old hotels.
Okay.
They had a big opening party for the book. So I went up there. And there were other people who owned houses in the book there too. And San Francisco has the famous Painted Ladies Row of little houses and all this stuff. So the guy doing it said, so if someone was there from the house, they would talk about it. If not, he would say something. They did a slideshow and stuff. So when he got to the Pink House, he said, this was the most requested book. Even though it was in the other book, people wanted more of the Pink House. So more people wrote to me saying the Pink House must be in the next book. And we let them take a picture inside because usually we don't, let anybody in.
Okay.
And so the guy says, blah, blah, blah. And he goes, and this is the only house in the book still owned by the original family.
Yeah.
And so when I got up there, I was like, yeah, I guess I need to thank you guys who bought these houses. And several of them had bought them from the last relative, because it takes a lot to maintain them.
Yep.
But I had no idea. And this was 25 years ago that this was the only house in that book. So that's something that, we're lucky it's still here, partly because the guy who built its daughter lived to be 93 years old.
Sure.
She left it to her grandson because her grandsons, which is how it sort of skipped a generation. My grandmother loved the house and stayed here, but she didn't technically want to, So it's thanks to those people kind of maintaining it. I suppose to a degree, there's an element of hoarding that eventually becomes sort of cherished.
Yeah.
There's original fixtures, which they put in the attic rather than throw out.
Yeah.
And of course, we have eras of stuff that there was an era where everybody just painted everything white. It's like this desk next to you. That was at one point painted white.
Really?
And it was
stripped down?
Because it was passé to have bare wood in your house. Everything needed to be white or cream. So antiques were all painted. That's the desk of the guy who built the house, daughter Fanny, who I've been talking about.
Okay, that's very old.
Yes, that's very old.
I do have one last question.
Uh-huh.
Well, I guess two now.
Okay.
You got me into it.
Is it haunted?
No. First is
I have my wedding pictures there.
I'm actually more intrigued as if there's any like secret passages in the house or something that could be seen as a secret passage.
The house has a very disappointing attic.
Okay.
It's a very sort of small, crawl spacey kind of thing. Jordan, the current caretaker, he was out on the roof cleaning some gutters or whatever and saw a window. I was like, what's that belong to? And then couldn't find the attic because it's behind another door, which is when the door's open, you don't see it because it's a little troll door. It's like a crawl space door. So if you just open the door, you wouldn't even see it. So it has a sort of disappointing attic, which we have found a number of fascinating things in.
Artifacts.
Yeah.
The
one of the rooms has sort of hidden drawers underneath the windows, which just look like a little detailing, but they're actually drawers. My grandparents found some old liquor in there one time.
Wow.
And with some friends had quite the party with this liquor, much to the horror of their mother, who was still living in the house at the time.
Right. Wow.
We didn't find anything interesting. I think there was a pan somebody put in there probably because there was a leak, so the water would be caught. And there's some old newspapers, which actually weren't that old.
Huh.
It wasn't like, Lincoln declares victory.
Museum.
So there, and then in the barn, the carriage house one time, we were cleaning out all this stuff, and I looked, there was an extra door to the same room, which is what everybody thought it was. And I kind of the lock was, you couldn't open it. And I pushed it open enough to look in. I was like, no, this is a whole different room.
Yeah.
It's not part of this room. And through it, it was like King Tut's tomb. I could just see all this stacked up furniture, tiny little room.
Yeah.
And so we broke the door off and we found, mirrors and back pieces again, which had become passe. So just put them in the barn. A beautiful wooden coat rack, another pieces of beds, and all these like things, which we then connected into the house. It's like, well, this matches this other thing, but we never knew there was a matching dresser to go with it. And here's the mirror. And
It's like a puzzle, kind of.
yeah. So have we found the last of those? I still have dreams about finding undiscovered, things in the pink house. I don't know. I think
Secret
probably.
hatches from the floorboards.
There was a secret hatch that there's a little hatch above one of the bedrooms here, which I discovered once from the outside of the house. There's sadly nothing in it. In the carriage house, there's like a cool trap door, but again, it's just a little crawl space.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's always some little, but there have been some big we found some old books in the attic about, which filled in the thing with the pink house and the ghost story is there's 2 drownings in the family.
Right.
And the pink house wasn't even built when the first drowning happened. The first drowning happened someplace totally different.
Okay.
But there's this whole poem which was written about it and all this stuff. Well, we found a book which was essentially sort of written for her funeral. So it's like her memorial book, which connected some dots we didn't know about. So that sort of changed our point of view. And eventually I was going to say earlier, like an obituary of her turned up. And the obituary is almost word for word what my grandmother had told me happened.
Really?
Which she had heard from either her grandfather or her mother. It was before she was alive. Mm-hmm. So this is how these so I'm always waiting for more little tidbits to come in.
Yeah. It's like Atlantis. You're still,
yeah.
Which comes from supposed rumors, but you either find it's true or untrue.
Now, the basement of the house is really quite cool. It's, it makes up for the attic.
Really?
Yeah. Cause the house was, there were additions put on over the years. And so in the basement, you see where the old walls used to be and the different sort of eras of, when people did the construction.
Right. And last question on the pink house is what do you think? Because you mentioned, the Wolfels might pass with you. What do you think the future of the house is? And if you don't want to, and please,
right.
If you don't want to get into that, we don't have to get into that. We can move on.
There was no real, and I just heard recently, probably with my parents passing, I guess there was a lot of talk in town about what's going to happen to the house. And what happened was that I bought it from the estate. My mother finally became convinced I really wanted the house, and my wife also, Christy, because she loved the house. And so, but yeah, they looked into various avenues, whether they could give it to Alfred and, and it would basically still be my house to live in. You'd have what do you call it? A lifetime use.
Yeah. Which
was how my grandmother's mother dealt with the thing. So right now I can tell you is I'm just glad I got it.
Yeah.
So I could do things, and there's the fountain outside. That's something I wanted. My father talked about doing, and the gate we sort of had to get the gate up. So there's new things I want to do, and there's more sort of community type things I want to do with the house.
That's amazing.
And hopefully it'll, I hope to be here for as long as possible. But yeah,
well, by the sounds of it, your family has a long history of long lifespans.
That'd be nice.
Yeah, right.
So I would hope that, whatever ends up happening, that it ends up becoming and staying part of Wellsville,
You still want it to be a living house, or?
That would be great.
Yeah.
As long as it's me, damn it.
Yeah.
So who knows? Really, my short answer is I just figured out how to make it mine after years of making sure that that happened. So right now, I'm still just trying to, tick off my wish list of let's finally get this fixed. Mm-hmm. So that's my real answer is I don't know yet. I just figured this much out, and I'm just right now satisfied. I just got it.
I want to enjoy it.
Right. We did Christmas lights this past year for the first time, in a long time, and and the Halloween thing. Thanks to Jordan, we keep building on that. And there's other things my wife wants to do, sort of more community related. That doesn't mean you can't book your new tour.
Doesn't mean.
But we're always looking to make friends. Seriously.
Well, I know that the community appreciates everything that your wife, and seemingly Jordan are doing with everything. And you just opened it up to trick or treating yesterday, and I heard that there was thousands of kids.
There was at least 600. Sure seemed like that.
The story, I just heard someone talking about it in Runnings. There was thousands of kids that showed up.
Far be it from me. I was wearing a mask and I couldn't really see very much. But there was a lot of people. It seemed like a theme park.
Yeah.
And I'd been here years ago. I encouraged my parents to stay later and later each year. Ridgewalk. If you're staying for Ridgewalk, why don't you just stay for Halloween just one time? It'll probably be fun.
Yeah.
And then they loved it. And so they got, the first year they had like 400 kids or more. And so it's kind of built from there.
That's amazing. Now with your film career, what got you into wanting to do kind of independent horror style films? You did mention that you love Halloween.
Right. Not the Halloween's not my favorite horror film. Jordan loves Halloween.
Right.
Not that I
meant
dislike
the
it. But
time,
that's not,
the Halloween.
oh yeah, Halloween. I love Halloween in general, and
Right.
the movies occasionally.
So it got me into video. I've said this.
I mean, I was always interested in. I guess although at first I liked science fiction and all this stuff from being a kid. Sometimes people grow out of that or whatever. I guess I didn't.
I didn't.
Yeah. Horror stuff is more emotionally based than like science fiction. I like science fiction, but there's more of a kind of, it's a symbolic battle of good versus evil and life and death and all these things that we all fear or kind of deal with in kind of a larger sort of symbolic way. And
Sure.
so although it was very popular thanks to Halloween, the movie, which was a low budget film that made a lot of money. It was a big kind of cultural phenomenon, still is to a small degree now even, or maybe a big degree. So it was something I was genuinely interested in. But after Halloween, lots of people, when they made their first movies, made horror movies because you could make them cheap. You didn't need stars, and there was a popular genre. And I'd read lots of reviews with people who like, well, it's not really a horror film. I don't really like horror films. I was like, we shouldn't be doing this job. Directing a movie is not something you can really fake your way through.
Right.
I think you can see it. I think especially with certain genre things, probably romance is a certain thing too. It's like, if you're not really into it, if you don't really believe it, anybody who is going to sense the sort of phoniness of it,
Right.
And you won't understand the certain things that people are bored with and the things people love. So which things to really exploit or do. So I have done other types of movies and I'm interested in all kinds of subject matter, but I do love, supernatural horror probably more for me than but I went through an interest in serial killers and all that stuff too.
Right. Serial killers are massive right now, especially for
they're coming
middle-aged women, right?
Yeah, they're coming back again.
I can't tell you how many women friends that I have that are just listening to serial killer podcasts all the time, or watching serial killer documentaries. It really, truly is huge right now.
Okay.
They're just drinking their wine and listening to or watching serial killer documentaries.
Okay.
The Ted Bundy one that just came out was a massive success.
Oh yeah. I haven't seen that most recent one. Yeah. Boston Strangler, the movie, is still one of the best serial killer movies, although it's not completely factually connected to that. Yeah. And then after that, then I sort of read a book about Ted Bundy and became really fascinated by Bundy. After about like 3 or 4 months of that, though, you really need to go take a bath. I mean, you just need to sort of cleanse your head because it really does. See, you're really interested, and then you're really disgusted, and then it's, I feel terrible. And then then your interest can build up again.
I think a lot of women are
and then eventually
Stockholm syndrome on these
well, yeah, it could be. And I don't know if I should ask the disturbing question, which
please do.
Okay, the disturbing question about serial killers, and I still haven't heard anybody really answer this. Not that I'm sympathetic at all, but some of them weirdly are somewhat strangely sympathetic or attractive, and other ones are completely just repellent, even though they're all really repellent. But the thing to think about, you made me say this, serial killers essentially, like, no matter what kind of weird thing, it's basically their sex life.
All right, yeah. That's what they...
So, if the only way you could have a satisfying sexual experience was to kill, eat, whatever, how long could you resist that?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Will you just go without? That's a nice thing to say, but it's kind of a basic desire and interest of people. And
it's
that's
like
kind of what...
a vampire who needs blood to survive.
Right, exactly. So anyway, but then eventually after Silence of the Lambs, then everybody did all these things and it kind of like went out of fashion, but thanks to like 48 Hours and Dateline and all these kind of true crime shows, which can be really interesting.
Right.
So serial killers are making a comeback, but yeah, there's sort of a vampire element to it, I suppose. This is sort of the double life, of course, is always sort of,
Yeah.
I suppose if you want to say, it's the ultimate fix him, like Norman Bates,
Yep.
Psycho. Well, if he just found the right girl, she could fix him. He wouldn't kill people anymore or something. So I'm not saying women all think that way, but yeah, there's a certain kind of.
I do. I think some of them get Stockholm syndrome when they're watching things.
I always tell people Stockholm syndrome is a very valuable thing. Like if you're working for somebody, you need some Stockholm syndrome working for you. You need them to get them to like you because otherwise you're gonna first mistake you make
they're
out
gonna
the
boot
door.
you out there.
Yeah.
That's true. So I'm gonna be 100% honest with you. Horror movies terrify me. My wife and I are terrible horror film watchers. The scariest one that and you'll probably laugh if you've seen it, that I've ever seen is Event Horizon. And I think it's because it was my kind of gateway. My brother
James Bond, was that kind of your first? Did you see it in a theater originally? Event Horizon.
I didn't see it. I was with my older brother. Yeah, I think I was when it was 97, so I was nearly 10. I think it was 9 when it came out. And my older brother was watching it. And I just wanted to seem cool in front of my older brother. He's like, "You shouldn't watch this, man." I'm like, "Nah, I got this. I slept with my mom for a week after we my buddy Ryan and one of our previous podcasts were talking about that. But that
movie, that movie sort of falls apart at the end, but that's one of the few. Alien to me, when I saw it, was like, okay, I don't live in a spaceship. So I went home. I wasn't really scared the alien was going to get me.
Yeah.
And there's certain things about that movie that I think, like Ridley Scott, the director, not the writer, but the director, like he just wanted to be a scary movie, and he succeeded in a lot of ways, but he wasn't really into science. That wasn't really his primary directive. But Event Horizon, like that actually was creepy outside of not living in a spaceship for some reason. They managed to mix the kind of horror sci-fi thing. And then at the end, it kind of becomes Hellraiser, and the director said the studio just wanted to get the movie out so that he could have fixed it.
The build was scarier, I feel like.
And I think they shouldn't show you the inside of the ship right at the beginning.
Right.
Because you then spend a long time discovering it. I just think it would be even better if you didn't have that first shot where you go inside. You should go inside with the people.
Yeah.
I think movies, the people should really pull the audience in. You shouldn't really be outside. In horror movies, there's lots like, don't go in there, the people need to, draw you through the story. You shouldn't be sitting back going, oh, look at this dumb butt. He's going to get killed, or she's going to get killed.
That's one thing my friend Ryan and I talk about, is that the scariest thing for me in the horror genre is sound. Sound scares me more than any visuals that come out, because I can get over visuals, and I can realize, just being in the film industry, I can make my mind realize that this is fake, but the sound just crawls under my skin.
That's interesting,
and just gets to me. I think
sound's incredibly important, but that's interesting. Of course, sometimes you don't know what that sound was. Like in The Exorcist,
so you don't see it.
Yeah, with The Exorcist, there was all this talk of like how the voices and all this weird stuff. Yeah. I don't think it might have been that movie. They were trying to find out what sounds disturb people. Well, bugs, bees and bugs is kind of an instinctual thing. And, it's interesting.
That's
real. Or in the Poltergeist, they use like squealing pigs, I think. So there's like,
it's
when they do a whole sound interview with the people about how did you get these? They had like baby pigs, and they hold them up to the mic and kind of squeeze them,
And in ghost films, like the Conjuring is probably my favorite. If I had to pick a favorite horror film, that's The Conjuring, because it had a happy outcome for that particular story, the first one.
Yeah.
But like the sounds of like the feet just running up and stuff like that just terrifies me, and like the clap that happened there. So it's it's sound that's the scariest.
I mean, it's something that films usually don't do smell well, but they can do sound really well. Yeah, it does make a difference. I see. In making films now, I see that most sound designers, which is a term that really came in about after Star Wars, Ben Burton, David Lynch's Sound of Alan split. Once they were really starting to use stereo again and really like using sound vividly, that was a big deal. And now those people would go create things themselves. Now I see what I call, there's a lot of shareware stuff, and I've done it myself. There's these libraries you go get. People tend to just go horror movie, scary sound.
Wilhelm
So
Scream.
it's yeah, Wilhelm Scream. Perfect. I really think it'd be better if people like, and a good part of that's a function of time. Although sound is cheap if you take the extra effort.
Mhm.
And I think the things where the sound is memorable is because somebody's actually, no, I don't want birds that somebody else has recorded. I'm going to go record my own birds, and I'm going to put them together
Foley
my own
artists
way.
fascinate me.
Foley and dubbing, and yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think right now there's a kind of a flatness to all that because people just pull the existing wave files and dump them in there. And I see it done. I mean, I do temp mixes for people. I end up using a lot of the temp sounds I put in for the final thing. It's like, well, I should have a sound editing credit now.
Right.
I was just putting in something.
Just doing some scratch audio.
Yeah.
Popping it in there.
Yeah.
What do you think that for you, what's your pinnacle film that you've made? That if someone was interested in seeing some of your films, because how many films have you directed or produced yourself?
Features, I think there's 13 if you include my Titanic documentary, which I would.
Mm-hmm. Features or shorts?
And then shorts, there's another dozen or so. And then, of course, I've done music for other things, which are, in a way, my movies. Of course, they're not. But
right.
Creatively, I was equally involved in those. If I edit a movie, I'm just as involved editing it as I would be if I was editing my own movie. I understand I'm not the director, but
you're piecing together the story
right.
from what the director shot.
But yeah, all of them should become your movie as you're working on them. You being and you all.
Right.
A good movie is made by a bunch of people trying to make the same movie and getting on the same wavelength. I usually shy away from saying what my favorite movie is because of my own. Because I might pick one that is somebody else's least favorite. Mm-hmm. For the same reason, I won't just like bag on the one that I think is horrible, because I've found people who then like, oh, I kind of liked that movie after you've like, oh my God, if I'd never done this, and then they're like, oh, I liked that movie. And now you've just kind of crapped on their dreams.
Right.
Right. Oh, the guy who made it hates it. Oh, how can I? But you want to gateway movies or something. I suppose the ones that I've written and directed and usually been involved in producing, I think probably turned out better or more interesting, unusual kind of thing. I was able to do things that weren't necessarily expected.
Right.
So, Beyond Dream's Door, my first feature, which just came back out on Blu-ray. So what was old became new again. Mm-hmm. Ghost Lake, which was the movie I came to Rushford to shoot, which was after working for a number of other producers, was the first thing I'd directed and written and done. Plus the fact I was able to come to Rushford in this area, which I grew up in, and make a movie. And then probably my most recent two features, which are Closed for the Season, which is also, they both have two titles. Closed for the Season, which is currently known as Carnival of Fear.
Okay.
And then Season of Darkness, now known as Asylum of Darkness, which some people see as being almost a kind of spiritual sequel to Beyond Dream's Door. It does have the same lead actor. You could almost say, well, this is what happened to that guy. It's almost like Beyond Dream's Door is not supposed to end this way, but if you say, well, the guy was just crazy and now he's been in an asylum and it's 30 years later, which sounds like Norman Bates or Michael Myers. So people have kind of connected those dots. Okay. For the shorts, The Birthmark, but then I did a kind of black comedy short, black humor is what I mean to say, because I did a movie recently with a largely African-American cast, which also would be one of my favorites, called Womb at the Top, that I don't really show that much, which is a sort of parody or a critique of like local news.
Oh, Anchorman.
And I still hear people say some of the stuff, especially the way they handle obituaries and stuff. And, the local news is like, nobody just dies. He was horribly killed.
Yeah.
Is there a way to be not horribly killed? It's never just a car wreck. It's a horrible car wreck, or it's terrible, or it's a vicious murder, as opposed to a non-vicious murder. The adjectives they use to like hype the stuff. And then most recently I did this film called, First Time Machine, which is the first short I've done in a long time, which I shot a year ago in August.
Okay.
It's just starting to go out to festivals and hardly anybody's seen it yet. But it's based on a short story like The Birthmark.
Yep.
One I had to buy the rights to this time. It's a much more contemporary author. So it was the first short I'd done in a while. And I just thought, well, it's this story about time travel. And after I read it, I thought, well, I could make this. It would be done really easily, but why would I? And then I thought, well, what if the time traveler is the only white character in it, which it's not like an alternate universe or anything. Yeah. It just added other things to the whole dynamic of the whole movie. So those are my favorite. Those are my favorite. Those are the ones I would recommend somebody starting with. That's not to say I disown movies that I didn't have everything to do with, but if you force me to say something, those are the ones that turned out. Those are the ones I had the most creative control over. So I think maybe in some ways they're more of a whole.
Right.
That may make you like them less because it's all weirder. Where somebody else, where they sort of pasteurized me, it's like. So one of my proudest moments as a filmmaker is I was teaching a film class, and I did this movie called Demonicus, which is a very. It's about this gladiator who comes back, sort of. And it was done very cheaply and very quickly for a company that then cut 7 minutes out of it without my involvement. Although you can find the 7 minutes on DVD. So it's this gladiator movie. So I'm teaching this film class, and there's Latin in the movie. The gladiator always speaks Latin. Before Last Temptation of Christ, the same year we were doing it, another movie comes out with all Latin. So I'm teaching this film class, and during one of the breaks or whatever, one of the students, I didn't expect anybody to know that movie, says that he goes, my brother has kind of a problem with that movie. So I'm kind of thinking he's like scared of it or something. Well, his brother had become like obsessed with the movie, which also his brother is probably in, I don't know, 4th grade or something. And, so he got kicked out in the movie. The gladiator says a famous thing the gladiators say, which is "Vae Victis," which means "woe to the vanquished." Okay, it's kind of like a thing, like hut, for football used to be. It's kind of like gladiator thing. You go to watch a gladiator, somebody better say "Vae Victis," right? Woe to the vanquished. So when he said, so his brother had become obsessed with the movie in general. And in English class one day, I don't know what had happened, like shouted out "Vae Victis" and got kicked out of class. I said, if my film career has resulted in a little kid shouting Latin and getting kicked out of his class because of it, then that's worth making. Right? That's worth getting up for in the morning and making movies. That was the last movie I thought somebody would have seen or would bring up. Yeah. I gave the kid he'd never actually seen the uncut version, so. I signed a copy and say, "Here, give this to your little brother."
Oh, that's awesome. we do have to wrap up here, but sure. But just thinking, if someone does want to see some of your films, they have an ample opportunity.
They actually do
this evening to see it at the library, right? You're premiering one of your films.
I talked about The Birthmark, which is one of the films being shown. The Birthmark was done as a short because we couldn't get a feature made, but it was done with an eye on trying to sell something. And since it was a literary adaptation, we all of us who made the movie thought that, well, maybe we can get some distributor who sells films for English classes and libraries and blah, blah, blah. And that did happen. And one of the few other films, which was part of that distributor's catalog, the distributor came to us from a film festival and wanted to pick up our movie.
Right.
So I looked through their catalog, and most of it's like The Life of a Frog, Fractions and You, very dry. But though they had this film, A Hunger Artist, which is a Franz Kafka story. And then my film. So those films were released. And for years afterwards, I would occasionally see that film on various people's desks. You go to development places. And so I got to know that guy's name, John Streisig. Because he just kept showing every job I'd go get, like there's John Streisig's demo reel. Sometimes he got the job, sometimes I got the job.
Right.
But I never met him. So eventually I did meet him at a film festival. And so weirdly, those two films are together again. So he's become a very, very good friend of mine. After years, I've said, I've been stalking you for years because your name, I just kept seeing your name, and people worked with you who I knew, but we never met.
Right.
So during COVID, John and I were looking for something to do, just like everybody, I suppose. And so he had this film he'd done as a graduate student of The Hunger Artist, and I had The Birthmark, which originally had a distributor together. So he's like, well, these are both adaptations, blah, blah, blah. And I had this other film, which I had done, which few people have ever seen, called He, which is adapted from a Guy de Maupassant story.
Okay.
So he was like, why don't we put these together as like a kind of literary pack. We'll do little documentaries in between each movie about this original story, how it differs and how it's the same, and also the authors, how this fits into their work. So we figured out the way, and we finally, even though COVID's been more or less behind us for a while, it's finally done, and this is the first time it's screening.
Okay.
So it's He by Guy de Maupassant, A Hunger Artist, and then The Birthmark, which was shot here in the Pink House and in Wellsville. And in between each one is a little 5 to 8 minute, documentary. So we think it kind of flows. So it'd be great to see it with an audience and see what they think.
So this it is like a world premiere.
And John Streisand came up with the title, which is Twisted Lit.
Okay.
They don't necessarily have like a Twilight Zone kind of twisted. Maybe they do, but it's more, they're all really about obsession and how these different characters become obsessed with different things that don't always turn out so
well. So tonight, 7 o'clock.
7 o'clock at the auditorium. I will be there.
Library.
I will be there to answer your questions about why the Pink House is pink.
Yeah.
and be love to just see how the audience reacts. They'll really be the first audience.
Are you going to put a camera on the audience? So
I should.
You should.
Do you have one you can loan me?
I do.
Oh,
you can use this one right here.
Oh, that'd be great. So I'll be there to sort of talk about them a little bit. But yeah, it's really like a little film festival there. It's combined. So it's an 85-minute block of shorts.
Nice.
By two different guys who became good friends because they made 2 of the 3 films in the first place.
Yeah. Well, Jay, I really appreciate you, inviting me into your home here, especially such an iconic home and meeting an iconic person now.
Thanks.
You're in it. You're doing it.
Thanks. I told people it's like I've become an asterisk in film history, at least.
Yeah.
This was a while ago. Maybe now I said I want to make it an exclamation point. But I remember the first book. There were reviews published in magazines, and they came and went. Eventually, there was like a real book, and I was in it. But I was literally like an asterisk, and then it explained, Jay made this one movie, and that's kind of like these other ones, and that's it. That's all we'll spend time with now.
Yeah.
So it's I'm an asterisk in a film history book. Right.
Is there anything closing out that you'd like to say to the community about Pink House, about your films, anything?
In the age of streaming, you can find, for $10, you can, or sometimes Beyond Dream's Door, there were people trying to sell that movie for $500 before it got reissued. So don't ever, but you can find my stuff. It's, it used to be like, oh, where do I find your movies? There's jwoelfel.com. Having a fairly unique name, makes it pretty easy. People, how do I find you? My name's Jay Woelfel. Just Google Jay Woelfel movie or jwoelfel.com. And many of them you can find streaming on Tubi. I don't know if I have movies on Netflix I worked on, but anyway, the stuff's out there.
Right.
So if one sounds interesting, let your fingers do the talking, and you can probably find them. Season of Darkness Sound of the Darkness is about to have a special edition Blu-ray coming out next year. So stream it and then buy it for all the extras.
Yeah. Support.
And the community, through making those couple movies here, Jordan, who's currently the caretaker, work on Ghost Lake. Okay. So I knew his family through that. And my wife, Christy, through my mom, but through herself, has made friends here from going to the Y and various things around town. So this is, it's one of our homes, it's not. And so I certainly appreciate the community, and it feels like a community to us too.
Good. Well, I know the community is happy with everything that you're doing, and we appreciate you and your wife. And again, thank you for having me in, and thank you for coming on my podcast.
You're welcome.